Magnus up 1-0 after a very quick checkmate in that first game. It was basically unavoidable at the end. And I see both players on the screen probably looking at that game review going, how the heck did that happen so quickly? MVL just kind of fell victim to this G4 move, an easy move to underestimate. And it's almost like Magnus was playing on easy mode. Like he just went Queen D3, threatening mate. MVL kind of let it happen. And that was that, David.
Yeah, and I don't know about what to say about that. I don't want to be too harsh, man. Simply, like a 24 move game in a high stakes event like this, it's kind of unforgivable. Queen D3, Bishop on C2. That's like an elementary attacking idea. MVL definitely should have slowed down. But okay, we get another game instantly. That's the good news.
It is the good news. You could make the argument that a longer break it might be more desirable, but if I'm MVL, I want to get straight into the next game, especially with the white pieces, and hopefully strike back.
And we see a very trendy line of the Sicilian. It's the accelerated dragon, where black very quickly fianchettos the bishop. And there were some forced draw lines, which I'm glad the players didn't go into there. And MVL definitely not wanting that with the white pieces. But okay, we get a Maroczy bind. What do you make of this? Good news for Maxime? All the pieces on the board for a while in this opening?
Agree. Yeah, I feel like the Maroczy bind, just in terms of the structure, when you have the C4, E4 pawns like that, has to be a good thing in general. I think most top players always want this structure if they can get it. Easy development. Of course, lots to watch out for. You have to kind of safeguard many pawns, many squares. But the rewarding thing, if you do take care of those things, is you have more space and much better outlook for the future. So I think he'll be happy to have a position that at least has a good future if he can manage the opening and middle game.
Yeah, very hard to get attacked here with white. So you're very stable, very solid for a long, long time. Extra space. Magnus loves these positions with the white side, so I think psychologically maybe nice to play it, the structure against him. Yeah, I think good choice by Maxime, and early days of course, but yeah, you've got to recover from that last blow. That was crazy stuff, so unexpected. This whole tournament, Aman, it's always throwing up these things when we least expect it.
Absolutely. This entire event has been wild, and I was never going to expect that the grand final would be any different. Bishop e2 played. I mean, a simple castling intended here. White always has in reserve moves like h3 or f3, and rook to c1 after knight d7, just to take care of the knight on c3. I mean, this is a kind of a pseudo pawn sacrifice, but I don't think Magnus has his eyes on the a2 pawn.
Well, you never know. He's pausing here, Magnus. I don't. Or maybe if it was like a must-win game with black and he's playing a lower-rated opponent, then you think about giving up your beautiful bishop and grabbing a flank pawn like this. But I agree. Even if there's I don't see any immediate refutation, I've got to admit. But
yeah, I will say that. I will say that. And yet he castles, which is probably the safer choice. The knight on d7, moves out of the way to facilitate the bishop on g7 being active. But another idea is the knight simply wants to reroute to the c5, e5 squares. And I have seen quite a lot of the time the pawn on f7 actually makes its way up to f5, more likely when the bishop on c8 could recapture.
Yeah, once this knight moves out the way, you're right. I'm very surprised by Magnus's last move. He's been dancing around with his queen a bit. That's the third time she's moved out. She lands back on d8, her starting square. And that is the signal for Maxime to go forward. And Magnus maybe just wants to set up in a hedgehog-esque type of structure, all the pawns on the 6th rank, and he's just going to ask Maxime to come at him.
And Maxime needs no further invitation. That this is where we get into the player's styles. F4 is not a move that this position requires. There's lots of slower ways to play, but definitely F4, a very Maxime move. He's taking control of the e5 square in the center that a lot of Magnus's pieces would want to use, and he's reserving attacking ideas with pushing forward with f5 in the future.
Yeah, super flexible for both sides, we should mention. Maybe Maxime feels a bit more responsibility to do something, partly because of the match score, partly because with the space, you often feel like you are the one who needs to make a decision. Magnus will just slowly, don't even know what he's going to do, to be honest, but he'll slowly creep forward if he can, maybe put some pawns forward, maybe start bringing his pieces towards the center. But yeah, I do really like these positions. I'm slightly biased in White's favor, generally, Aman.
Right. And maybe this is also a bit of gamesmanship by Magnus. He knows that MVL is going to feel compelled a little bit to kind of maybe overpress. So he's giving him one of those positions where maybe that's possible. And it's not to say that every advance here is going to be incorrect, but we're definitely going to get that type of game where Magnus is almost looking to rebound and look for counterplay off of MVL's decisions.
Yeah, and there we go. Already the first little tussle on the queen side. Both sides are kind of bluffing with pawn sacrifices or kind of bishop for knight exchanges. It was possible there to wreck White's pawn structure, I should say, but again, it comes at the cost of your beautiful dark square bishop, and Maxime's rook would have opened up. Now, White should not get tempted to take on c5 and take this pawn on a4, because at the very end of the variation, the black bishop would come and would have come to d4, pinning the white queen. That would have been a bit nasty. Okay, bishop g4. Feels like they're tiptoeing around each other here.
It does, yeah. And I have to say, at least visually, it feels like Magnus has accomplished a little bit more. Looking at the knight on c6 and kind of expecting maybe knight a5 in the near future, hitting c4, hitting the b3 square, also opening up the bishop on b7. And I was even considering, on the last move, I was considering it, but in general, the move f5 by black could be a sneaky way to actually open up lines for black to use against white's position.
Yeah, definitely. I think Magnus, if he were forced to, he might have played f5 last move, but yeah, he's happy to build up. He probably feels quite comfortable knowing that Maxime hasn't really improved White's position too much in the last 3 or 4 moves. I don't like the fact that he kind of played rook c1 and then back to b1. Rook doesn't make a great impression there. And bishop c4 does feel like a kind of one mover. And maybe he'll just get the queen out the way Magnus next, and then he'll bring his rook to the center or decide on f5. Maxime loses a tempo. He drops back with his bishop. Again, feels like he's just waiting here.
Yeah, it does feel like he's kind of going back and forth, whereas Magnus's position seems to be improving. I mean, I can see a knight, like the knight on c3, doing well on the b5 square, hitting the d6 pawn, but there's also that knight on d2 that needs to get out of the way, and there's not a great square for that piece, to be honest with you. F1 is not terribly impressive, and first sort of committal decision, pawn to e5, at the very least, David, even if this is an achievement for Magnus, I think it gives MVL that sort of attacking thrust that he's looking for.
100% agree. I must admit, that's why I just kind of marvel at the games of Magnus, Hikaru, and these guys. They're never scared to make these committal decisions and back them up with energetic play. Yes, Magnus gets an outpost, but he also gives a lot of squares. And like you said, MVL, potential attack, now indirect threat against the black rook. And pawn on f5, you always start to get a bit scared of it advancing further. So this is suddenly not one-way traffic anymore. And yeah, it's just a battle of squares, right? It's both sides have beautiful squares for their knights.
Yeah, the e4 pawn is under attack. Both of those knights in, performing a defensive job there. The pawn on a4 is great. So it feels like there's just so many squares and pawns and weaknesses. And on top of everything, there's also this attack that White's trying to push through over here. So maybe bishop back to h3 and, try to get really crazy with a move like g4.
Yeah, I like it. And I could imagine Maxime playing something like that in the near future. He's hesitating. What's he thinking about here? Is it something like f6? But that looks like it doesn't, or shouldn't work at least. Maybe, though. Trying to get greedy, hitting the rook.
Yeah, that's one of those moves where I think you could probably successfully take the bishop and just play it safe, or even give up the material, which Magnus would probably not hesitate to do.
Yeah, agreed. He loves sacrificing the exchange. Okay, we see it.
Wow.
Oh, and now the knight on d4 at least has been undermined, so we see some exchanges.
Yeah, the knight, like bishop takes on d4, does get that pawn back, but also kind of plays into Magnus's overall hand, which is trade a lot of pieces, and everyone has weaknesses in this position, so it's up to the players to really prove it now.
Yeah, it's level material. We should remind everyone, but you're 100% right. It's all about the remaining weaknesses here, and normally I do quite like knights. If the queens are on, for example, the white queen could combine with the knights, and maybe some dark square weaknesses for black. But queen exchange, it's Magnus Carlsen. It's an endgame. Can't see him being in too much trouble here. E4 maybe going to drop off for d6. We'll see a bunch of exchanges now.
Yeah, all those weak pawns that we were talking about earlier are starting to just fall off one by one. And it's a good reminder in these positions that you always want to be, creating a threat. You don't see Magnus playing rook d8 to guard his weak pawn. You see him playing rook e8 to make a threat on White's weak pawn. Just always, always playing active ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Every move counts, and you always want to be quicker in the race. Magnus, though, making a bit of a face there. Maybe thinking that he's not gotten any advantage here, but it doesn't look like he's worse either, which is good news for him. A draw in this game, maybe looking likely, Aman, just due to the reduced material here.
Yeah, certainly a great chance. And of course, with the target score of 2.5 points, a draw putting Magnus back with the white pieces just in the overall match puts him in a fantastic position to even close it out in 3 games. So I'm sure he's not thinking that far ahead right now, but what he definitely knows is draw is a perfectly good result.
Yeah, game by game, move by move, and all that stuff. And okay, we see the first exchange of pawns. Just like you said, every move comes with a threat. That takes with the bishop first in order to force this exchange. And okay, more pawns dropping. It's 4 versus 4. I tend to prefer having the pawn mass though here, especially because the white a pawn, even if it becomes passed, it's going to take an eternity for it to kind of cross to the other side of the board with rooks still remaining. Whereas the white king, if the black rooks get to the second rank, you could imagine the white king coming under fire here.
Yeah, agreed. The pawn on a3, if it was on a6, it's almost more of a dangerous pass pawn, but on a3, it feels like more of a weakness that can be targeted. Not very well supported. So MVL, as the eval bar suggests, just slightly worse, but obviously a draw is still the most likely result.
Yeah, I think the dream here for white would be to trade off all the rooks, and then the a pawn becomes a real kind of outside threat. And yeah, there we go. He actually prepares to push that pawn forward. Who would you pick in this position?
Well, I definitely pick Magnus. It feels like the kind of position that he's just really happy to be in, where the results that you're playing for are all in his favor. I could see him even winning this position. Rook c2, by the way, is a move that indicates that desire. You know, if a4, a5, a6, Magnus is looking at counterplay. Like, he wants to move the knight and bring his other rook into the e2 square.
Oh, MVL's just ignoring that idea though.
Uh-oh.
Okay, knight trade. I thought
Okay,
he
well,
played like knight c5.
yeah, I agree. Knight c5, knight g5. I was looking at very aggressive options, but with the a-pawn going and the nature of the position, I think he wanted to play it safe with knight d2. But rook e3 it's almost MVL saying, like, I'm not quite done with this game just yet.
Yeah, nice move. I think Magnus might have missed this one. Counterattacking, offering a rook trade. So the knights will remain on the board at least for a move or two longer. To trade or not to trade first. Rook takes e3. Maybe he's going to run Magnus, but then, yeah, I don't know. It just feels like Magnus, just with his last move, might have let MVL back in the game.
Yeah, just a little bit. It does feel like that momentum-wise. And with the rook going over to the c file, you know, the rooks cannot double on the second rank as easily because they're on the same file now. And an interesting thing is, if all the rooks disappeared and it was a knight endgame, white would be doing pretty well with that pass pawn all the way on the a file.
Yeah, so it's all about which pieces to trade every endgame here. Clocks are ticking, no increments. I wouldn't mind seeing a time scramble, I've got to admit. Very different from the previous game, which is a good thing for MVL.
Exactly. So we're down into, you know, at least this game has gone much longer than the first one, right? So we're getting into that part of the game where all of a sudden time becomes a factor, and now it's just a 3-minute blitz game instead of a 10-minute game. So we'll see whether, you know, this game actually, whoa, rook e2, knight f3. I wasn't expecting so much drama from a position I thought was going to liquidate.
Whoa, and knight takes h2. Brilliant
Oh my
move,
goodness.
apparently. The idea is that if the knight is captured, black will play pawn to g3, a fork, distraction for the white king there, and the white rook might fall at the very end. That is brilliant. That's out of nowhere.
Wow. I'm in shock because it really felt like pieces were just going to trade, and MVL definitely saw knight f3 and thought king f2 was safe. Instead, we're going to have an exchange, and now it's a rook end game where you got to push that pawn.
Yeah, and computer says level, but this could still go in any direction. The black rook forced into passivity. Black does have a 3 versus 1 advantage, though, on the king side. I've got to say, this one might be logical that this is level. It just feels like black will not be able to push on the king side anymore. And white will just wait with his rook if need be, and the black rook simply cannot move.
Yeah, there's usual idea is that when you have your rook behind a passed pawn like this, that you have great chances. But black's rook is very well stationed. You know, it's defending the g6 pawn while preventing any movement on the other side. And, well, I mean, the plan is clear here. He wants to go and just take this pawn.
Yeah. And it's going to be an interesting dynamic when you take the pawn. White cannot actually recapture and go into a king and pawn endgame because black will be winning long term. So white will have to move the rook away here. But a check, the pawn drops, and yeah, everything disappearing. Ooh, although the black king's coming. Still not obvious.
Yeah, played with confidence, king g5. I feel like this is a moment where MVL needs to be quite careful. King e2, I don't think we can actually grab that pawn on f5. So, you know, this is more of a rook to f4 move, maybe in reaction, and just kind of hold on.
Yeah, just wait and maintain the fortress. And Magnus reacted slightly. I think he was a bit frustrated, but looks like neither side can improve their position right now. And okay, we'll see. Everything fizzle out. King versus king. It's a draw in game 2.
Yeah, wow. What a weird result. Like, to get to a draw that quickly, I think maybe both players thought there was more in it than that. But MVL looking calm, cool, collected. He's already left the chair. He's happy to